thanks to you both for your time. And I'm going to hand over to you each to introduce yourselves.
Hi, everyone, and thank you, Deirdre, for the invitation. I'm coming at this with a very kind of novice point of view because everything is kind of new to me, but literally my regarding asset mining, but some stuff you do some stuff without realizing that you do them. But anyway, so my name is Jimina Muhammad. I'm currently a Royal Academy of Engineering Enterprise Fellow in South Wales University, and I'm a fellowship that is awarded to engineers to actually take their idea to market. And I'm the CEO and the founder of Mine and Natural, which is a startups with an innovative tool for women with Afro hair to maintain Afro hair. Prior to that, I used to be a researcher working in the field of printing and coating, and I think the rest you can read. We'll just move forward to go to the core of the subject.
Thank you, Yumna, and thank you for coming.
Hi, folks, and yeah, as I think the operating word here is this is a discussion, so let's make it a discussion. I'm looking at chat, seeing 11 participants. Let's get at least 11 questions if we can. Yeah, I'm Rob Morgan, pretty much a career academic based in Cardiff Business School, but I tend to get out a lot. So when I get out, what I do is work with companies, a lot of companies, not least Untapped Innovation as well, but also with inside of firms and also consult. But largely what I try to do is study this stuff and study this stuff not in one firm, but across multiple firms. The first call I had this morning, we were looking at 175,000 earnings conference calls of CEOs with analysts talking about their digital transformations with this particular project. So I tend to study firms at scale, often international firms, mostly US firms, in fact. And we try from that to try to identify patterns, trends, themes, rules, if you want, of what we can generalize to then take that to other firms. So we try to be able to study, a bit like Deirdre was saying, study the past in order to develop predictions about what will work in the future. That's pretty much my world.
Brilliant, thank you, Rob. And obviously quite a nice balance between you both, the world of STEM and the world of marketing represented. So we'll see that come to life, I'm sure, as we get into the questions. So Yumna, let's start with you. I mean, what do you think the benefits are of asset mining in your world, either as you think about your work at university, as you think about your work as running the business? Where did the big benefits come from?
As I said, it's a term that is new to me, but it's interesting how you've been doing something without actually putting a name on it. So to just kind of explain, when you talk about asset mining, I say I'm approaching with kind of a wider view to it, and I will explain a little bit why the business started. So literally in the final year of my PhD, I was a living nanny. I used to look after this little girl, and she had this beautiful thick Afro hair, and she would literally cry every single time that her mom, every single Sunday when her mom washed her hair. And it was principally the process of applying lotions to the hair, because Afro hair is very thick, so you need to part the hair, apply, and detangle. And then she would also cry every morning, wanting to have her hair straight and in a ponytail. And I didn't quite understand that until the day I dropped her in school and I find 4 girls in a queue doing each other's hair, and they all had their hair straight in a ponytail. And it really got to me, and I just, thought to myself, if one day I can change that experience, I will do it. So when I think about asset mining, that was actually one of those experiences, actually going back to reflecting on that. So I went on and actually carry on my study, got my PhD, started working in the field of printing and coating, and really fell in love with those processes, flexography, inkjet, screen printing, and all of these different type of things. And then somehow I got to realization that, you're in this world where you're always kind of creating. And as an academic, asset mining is very important, because whenever you write a project or a PhD, the last part is like future work, discussion and further work. So it's how we build up from the work that was done, and doing those whole thing of actually reading references, reading paper. It is actually asset mining. So that's kind of interesting, as I'm saying, because I'm learning, you putting a term into something that you do so naturally. So all of this thing, and I just kind of in this fear of always creating. So I just thought, why not actually solve that problem? And so when I look at asset mining, and when you told me about the term itself, I'm like, I see it as about, a way of working, when it's come to the engineering and the science aspect of it. But when it's come to the human experiences, it's just about your experiences. And it all started from this little girl that I just like, it will be good one day. And then bringing those two words together, actually, from that personal experience that was so far removed from, you know, you will think coating and hair, but actually printing is about coating. And what I was trying, the problem that her mom tried to do is to coat her hair with molecules that will enable her hair to be moisturized. So it's actually bringing those two words together. So it's kind of interesting to see that I have been doing asset mining in different way without even realizing it. And I guess when I look at it right now is important because that's where, you know, innovation come through and creativity and, you know, novelty. So that's pretty much the look I'm taking into the whole view of this idea of asset mining.
A brilliant example, yeah. And Rob, when Yumna touches in there, actually, there's an approach I think in the world of academia potentially that isn't as hardwired in the commercial experience. I mean, where do you see the benefits of asset mining, and what do you think maybe academia possibly does better than the commercial world in that regard?
Yeah, no, so in the academic world, I think, I mean, the whole thing, academic world is exactly about this. So you're a dean of a business school, a vice chancellor of a university, any sort of knowledge-based organization, it's about asset mining. And, you know, what we do in the classroom is push the frontier of knowledge. So we teach students what they need to know, you know, be it physics 101 or whatever the subject matter is. But, you know, we would claim, certainly at Cardiff, that we have a research-led based curriculum. And therefore we bring into class, you know, what we're finding, what's sort of hot, maybe not in our papers yet. So yeah, the whole of the university world is exactly about asset mining. But I guess something we'll get onto later on is how you start to manage assets, synthesize assets, and then create, you know, catalyze effects from, you know, the dormant potential as you were describing earlier. And I think that's key. So, in specific answer to your question, what are the benefits of asset mining? I think that for me there are two. And one is what's the business case, and the second one is what's the organizational case. And the business case is easy. It's 3 words: 22%. What does that mean? Well, one guy, an economist based at Stanford, who I particularly admire, Nick Bloom, he's a Brit, and does a lot of work on the value of management practices and looks at innovation, but other factors as well. And we tend to find that of all the management interventions that organizations use, R&D has the biggest factor. So that comes down to 22% returns across the average of averages across industries, etc. So that's the value, and that's double the value we have from our digital transformation investments, and that's almost double the value of our human capital investments. So as much as, you know, nowadays digital transformation, hot topic, human capital, you mentioned this, aligning this with a people-based factor again is key. But we find really the business case for R&D investments, and then those investments providing returns is double. And there's a collective effect. So we can't just disaggregate these. If you add the R&D impacts with the human social capital investments, and then link that to digital, then, you know, the additive effect is overwhelming. So I think the business case is quite clear. Then we look at, again, I'd like to, you know, advising managers on what should I do in these circumstances. Well, there's a lot of alternatives in marketing we can use, levers we can press, buttons we can press to create the impact. So advertising, pricing, price reductions, discounting, sales calls, digital, again, word of mouth, or leveraging word of mouth effects. All these things have what we describe as elasticities, which is the measure of their value on return. So they all deliver great value. The human touch is powerful. So word of mouth tends to have a very high elasticity, 0.5. Brand assets, 0.72 from my last reckoning, from the study of studies that tends to record these things. But innovation is off the chart. So again, the takeaway for the chief executive, but also the chief marketing officer, chief innovation officer, and the C-suite generally is, there's lots of things you can do, but if innovation and R&D isn't in the mix, everything else is pretty much tactical and kind of futile. There are certain areas where you don't want to go. You know, pricing is always bad. It's bad for everybody. Bad for innovation, bad for the customer, bad for you, bad for your competitors. It just causes deterioration typically. But everything else sort of above the line is attractive. But, you know, if you include innovation in there, the business case becomes extremely strong. And then the next thing, you know, what is strategy about? It's about two things. So, you know, the differentiation of your product and then the cost. So you have two things you can play within strategy: cost leadership, differentiation. And cost you can move and play with, but beyond a certain point where marginal revenue equals marginal cost, back to perhaps some of your economics training, the rest of it is about price and willingness to pay. So moving that lever becomes the key focus for management rather than necessarily managing cost. And that is where innovation really drives value, is because it does fundamentally increase willingness to pay. And invariably play at premium as well. So it's managing those drivers, I think, is key. So that's the kind of business commercial case, which is slam dunk, it's clear. If you're not doing it, why aren't you? And the next thing is really the organizational elements. And you talked about this because fundamentally this is about knowledge. So in my sort of language, we measure this as knowledge spillovers. So there is rarely a failure in innovation. It's just it didn't realize its immediate return. But that knowledge is now in the repository, being redeployed, bundled, and is going to come out somewhere else in some sort of value. So the organizational case, the organization learns, reprocesses, learns in a different way, and at some point that residual knowledge is valuable in a subsequent time period.
Yes, absolutely. And you, in your experience, do you have any tips or advice that you would give to people based on your experience and how to kind of keep this asset mining? When you and I connected initially, we talked about kind of having that curiosity mindset and not losing it. Easier said than done, though. So any tips from your side on how you hold on to this?
I think for me, like I've always been quite curious. And I think, one thing I used to do when I used to be an academic is, I think first taking that time to have fun and play. The labs, sometimes when they are like, there is a project plan, everything needs to be done, but actually somehow that kind of killed that space of creativity. So something I used to do quite a lot when I was an academic is Fridays afternoon, like, the last 3 hours, I will take them and just go to the lab and experiment on things that were either connected to the project or things that I thought will be interesting that not necessarily my line manager had not asked me to do. And I usually feel like I almost like hide about it because I'm not actually doing what I'm supposed to do. But actually good things come out of that, because some of the stuff that came out went on into being full on projects because we find something that was interesting. So I think when I look at it, I look at it from the eyes of an employee when I was working in an organization. And now when I'm shifting into trying to create an organization, very young organization, I think it's about creating that safe space for people to have that time to go on and build on, or reflect on their experiences, or even bring the new to the old one, and just have fun in the labs, because it's fun. I mean, most of the people go into science for that, and sometimes that actually get taken away from the process because of the stress and project management and stuff like that. But one thing that I've learned recently from wearing a hat of a manager is also not just creating a space, but actually creating a safe space. Literally, I'm by myself right now, but I had to some point for 16 weeks, I had a marketing intern. And it was quite interesting because at the end I decided to do a 360 review, so that I can learn about myself and vice versa. And then it was quite interesting because one thing that she told me, I was not really expecting what she told me. And she literally told me that she felt that sometimes I was kind of like, stopping her in her creative, how can I say, in her creative journey. When she was working on something, I will come on and decide and kind of carry on the work, because things are so new right now. There's no structure. I do a little bit of everything, and I was like, I will carry on that work. And although I did it because I thought that her key strength was actually copywriting, coming up with like amazing messages, and that I was slightly stronger on the design, I didn't communicate that. But also the fact that I did do that, she felt like I was blocking her into that journey. So that was really a good lesson for me to learn, because it's very much, it's different when you're an employee and when you're an employer to actually, I understand the value that it does, because I used to almost like feel like I'm sneaking away to do it. But actually, when I'm working with her, I actually did something I wouldn't have liked somebody to do when I was an employee. So that was a learning lesson for me. I would say safe, a space, but a space that is safe. The other thing I would say is really speaking to the people that we're aiming to serve. Because when I first started my idea, I kind of really was very, very doubtful. And I spoke to loads of different women. And sometimes our customer know things and have issues that we just don't know about. And although but when I first organized this customer review for my product to actually engage to know whether, it will bring value and everything. And I was really pleased to hear that the idea will bring values, and the exclamation in and the intonation in the women voices, I really heard like, oh my God, this will change my life. I was like, okay, exciting. But something interesting happened. There was this little girl that came to the review, and then she said something to her mom, and I said, what did she say? And then her mom said, she said, could you also ask her to invent a helmet for Afro hair? And I was like, oh my God, that's an idea. I didn't think about it, but that's an idea. And it's just like, it really kind of like taught me that lesson. But by whether we are businesses, the end goal is to serve a customer, and hence being into that conversation with them is actually important. Whether we can improve, or either is there some issues that are facing that are not being solved. So that little experience with that little girl was kind of interesting for me at the beginning. Yeah, just speak to people, hear them, and have those focus groups to really get the best out of the experience and their wants and desires.
Interesting. And in speaking to one user, you have another user group obviously emerging. So that's
Exactly.
and Rob, back over to you, and I'll remember to ask you to unmute this time. Has it gone there? As Unit talks about creating a safe space and creating this time to listen, what do you see as the biggest barriers in organizations to creating that systemically, strategically, and creating a culture of that over time?
Yeah, no, what Uma describes is fantastic, but it's also bizarrely the privilege of oftentimes the smaller firm. I had a conversation with a former customer service director for a white goods company just last week, actually, and we were talking about large firms have a lot more slack in resources and able to do certain things like you described, and small firms not. Whereas the evidence is the other way around. Large firms are very good at measuring and managing everything. And if there's slack, we'll exploit that and we'll exhaust it. Whereas small firms really do have that space to go, as you say, the idea of exploration space as well, I think is how Uma characterizes this. And there's also exploitation space. So exploitation is the short-term innovations, the product adaptations, just to change, leading to short-term gains. But the long-term gains, what are the next business wins? That does come from exactly as you described there, Uma. So some of the barriers, I think, first of all, in big organizations, medium to big size organizations, is the black box, is how can we demonstrate that this input leads to this output? It's a black box. And the big numbers we talked about, but there's still a chain of effects, and it's understanding what, this leads to this, leads to this, leads to that. So, Uma, as you say, your entire business value proposition is based on, it sounds like, one key conversation, but that had to happen somewhere. You did just know where that was going to happen. And so, this is where the investment comes in realizing there's a domino effect here. So I think, the black box, but this is an organizational syndrome. We have CFOs who say, what's the return on marketing investment for this? I can give you a number, but I actually don't really know yet. And so there is some soft skills in that. I think the barriers are companies also, the managers I speak to define themselves and the businesses they run around the products and services they have. So they look at their customer through the lens of their product. So, what do? I do this. I provide accounting services. So, right, what do your clients buy? Accounting services. And so it goes on. And you think, no, why? For what purpose? What are they trying to do? Is it about compliance for HMRC, or is it about management control, insights, new investments? What else is going on? And so I think with innovation, we over focus on trying to improve things that are novel. And ironically, we should, and what the classic entrepreneur typically does is focus not on new technologies that are expensive, difficult to and costly to develop, but meaningful innovations that oftentimes can be adapted innovations. And if the value of innovation is determined, 97% of it is determined by imitation. So we're talking about forms of that. So just, talking about looking at the customer problem in a different way. Yuma, the example you give, another one that I often talk around is bagged salad. Whoever got a bagged salad by a company asking customers, do you like my lettuce? Of course, that never happened, did it? And bagged salad, you immediately know what I mean. Yeah, well, you have to get into the head of how salad is used, consumed, the problems with that. And so that's a meaningful product. It just happens to be incredibly profitable. And there's a number of other gains as well with that. So it's not novel, but it's very meaningful. And that's, I think, more where the reach is. But there's other things. Companies spend a lot of time developing capabilities. That's great. But those capabilities in time become rigidities. So they become self-limiting for when you need to, the word of the moment from Silicon Valley, pivot. Well, you can't pivot if you're very good at doing one thing and you need to unlearn and do something else. It's just not natural. And so there's a lot of core rigidities get in the way, from mindset through to skill, resource, and activity. Another point, ideas are getting harder to find. We kind of think that everything's getting better, GCSE grades, A-level grades. We see this across the piece, but Moore's law we hear about, the every 18 months, the doubling of the microprocessor. If we apply that to ideas generally, since the 1970s, it takes 18 scientists to do that, to double, not so much the chip, but innovation generally, than it did in one person to do in the 1970s. So in other words, the investment in innovation now needs to be so much higher to create that first idea. So it's highly valuable when you do, but again, the front end investment is critically important because ideas are harder to come by. And again, I come back to the point, these don't have to be novel products, but even meaningful products. And I think, Deirdre, your 3D Wave Andrex example is a gem where rather than find big new hit ideas is to look at this subcategory innovation. So categories are typically very mature. Yeah, we can talk about disruptive innovation and moving out of the category, etc., and new categories, sure. But subcategory innovation is often highly valuable. Thinking the meaningful consumption of the product, the minor modifications to the product that can become so much more powerful to what the customer experiences about. And I think the 3D Wave it's the sweet spot of that.
Brilliant. I'm going to pause you there. I had a couple of other questions, but I'm conscious of time, and I'm just going to hand it over to all of the participants on the call. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to pop them into the chat. We'll just give it 20 or 30 seconds for those to come through. If not, I'm just going to ask you each quick question to finish off. Sorry, there we go.
Everyone's eating lunch. That's what
I think so.
They have their mouths full. That's why the cameras are off and no one can type because there's mayonnaise on their fingers.
I have a long list of questions anyway, so I'm going to throw two quick ones at each of the, why is asset mining important for the future of your business? And looking forward kind of post-COVID, why do you think asset mining could be a strength for what you're doing?
I think, Rob, first, thank you so much, Rob. What you said right now about, about structure, but also that takes away that flexibility and that creativity. That's really something that is really interesting for me to hear, because actually I'm the opposite. I'm kind of like, a bit of a free-spirited person. I'm like, I need to put more structure, but I'll keep that in mind into not losing a bit that free spirit. So regarding your question about why it's important, and also what Rob just said right now, it's funny because I had two different ideas. When you think of when you have printing, when you think of printing, you have different printing technology for different viscosities and stuff like that. So I had two different ideas. And I think until here, I was like, kind of like, I'm going to focus into this one idea, and then later on, I would come up with the new mechanism. But actually, this conversation is really interesting, and actually something that happened 2 weeks ago. One woman that has different hair texture told me like, oh, this feature here is not really, you know, it might not necessarily be right for me. And so I guess for me right now is just kind of keep in mind that right now you know, finances wise, you know, you can't have a huge finance to actually bring different products to market. I need to focus in one, but not necessarily straight run away to bring that new idea, but have those conversation with this woman, because by the sound of it, she was really, my hair, the coarseness of my hair is quite tight, and that woman has much more looser hair. And so it's like kind of seeing actually the different market that this can hit, you know. That is kind of one thing that I kind of like need to keep in mind. And maybe from the different market, maybe the variation in just the simplicity of, you know, some of the feature to actually bring more value to some of those new women that are not, the problem is not as important to them, but it will still bring value. So I'm going away with some tips and some things to keep in mind for the future. Thank you, Rob.
Always listening, isn't it?
Great.
Rob, that's my question actually of you. There's two questions that have come through. I'm going to throw one from Gareth, who says, do you have any specific advice regarding regards guarding against predicting the past? It's a risk that some of our guys use large volumes of data and expect the same results, which narrows innovative thinking.
Me? Oh.
Yeah.
So
that one.
yeah, I get involved in forecasting, but what is forecast? It's, you know, it's the best guess based on, you know, retrospective data. And you know, we use one of the models that we're working now usually has 6 gig of data. So yeah, a lot of data. We can even analyze things, but fundamentally, what does that generate? It's interesting and creates a compelling case, and there are many consulting friends of mine that make a very good living doing this sort of work, and it's impressive. But the problem is, what's the reality test? And you know, what's the output? You know, is it going to produce bagged salad? Is it going to be the Dollar Shave Club that basically looks at a very, very basic customer problem of buying expensive cartridges for your razor and having to go to the store to get it? You know, someone deliver it to home, and let's have some sense of, you know, competition in the market. And then years later, we find, you know, an $8 billion company is born. So I think, yeah, using retrospective data is useful. It's one of the tools. It can be useful, but we know there are all sorts of reasons why things change. Strategic inflection points, reference points, different things within data we use to know how things can be punctuated. So we're very good at arguing after the fact why things went wrong. It's all about predictive power in the future. That's imprecise as a science. So it's a question of, it's one of the tools to use, but by no means should it be, it should be respected, but it has its place in the toolkit.
Okay, and building on that, actually, a question potentially, Rob, I think to you as well, from Jack. How should we reward employees for innovation, and how should it be factored in? Do you have any data based on your reviews of different companies on innovation reward structures? Yeah, very clear. It's quite Machiavellian. If you want to create a competitive market, or if you want to create innovations, you go to a competitive marketplace. So the intra-type competition we often see, where you know, we see this in fast-moving consumer goods in particular, auto, many industries where there are similar substitute products and services available, and that's often where innovation tends to be quite hot, and that's great. Exactly the same inside of organizations. If you want to create a competitive group of people within inside the organization, I wouldn't say divide them, but it's a question of give them the power to do certain things, develop very clear metrics on how you're going to map this, and then set them to it. So it goes against the grain of things like team working and other things where you have collaboration. But we in the academic world, for example, in as much as I'm loyal to my department, my school, my university, etc., I can be evaluated with different metrics very, very clearly. And that makes me work to those metrics. So in other words, my incentives and my effort is directed exactly to how I'm measured. And if you don't measure it, your performance is not going to align to it. So you really measure what matters. But that has to be, there's two elements to this, and I like the way Jack has mentioned this, is one is the incentive element, the other is then the reward element. So, you know, that effort has to track through the rewards. But equally,
you would then map performance, but you correspondingly then map behaviors. So there's two types of control here. One is output control, one is behavioral control. If I'm a sales manager or sales agent in the field, working for Yuma, you're going to measure me on sales calls, apps, behaviors. So end of the week, I'm in 40 sales calls. How much business have you got, Rob? 0. Okay, I don't care how many sales calls you've got. I want you to hit, $500,000 by the end of the week, please. Output control. So it just becomes specific to that, I think.
So it sounds like a healthy dose of competition, and I think your advice in there was creating that safe space, which actually I think in elements are kind of conflicting ideas, as we say with every great innovation. There's inherent tension, I think, in some of this as well. I'm conscious of time. We've run over, but absolutely spectacular insights from both of you, and a really good discussion. Thank you very, very much for joining, and thank you for everybody for logging in. We'll send the slides from the deck out to everybody afterwards. Big thank yous coming through as well from Gareth, some of the other participants as well. We'll send the slides out, and yes, we'll do some follow-up for you as well, won't we, with some of the quotes, etc. afterwards. So if you weren't taking notes, Fee was taking spectacular notes over there, I think, as well. So we'll make sure we get that out to you guys. Thank you.